Back in 2011, one of my cousins had a horrific car accident. Doctors told her parents to prepare for a funeral, but, be it a miracle or my cousin's fighting spirit, she lived. Elated, I booked a flight to visit her. My uncle lives in this private community. He purchased 2 pieces of land and built houses. During that time, the housing development in that area wasn't prominent. So, neighbors were spread out. About 65 yards behind his main house, there's a forested area that is untouched. One evening, my family and I were jumping from topic to topic, having a great time now that my cousin was back home. I'm not sure who brought it up, but we started discussing about the paranormal. During that time, I was always skeptical of ghosts, spirits, etc. Meanwhile, my family was the exact opposite. They started to talk about their experiences throughout the years. More recently, they believed they were seeing my grandfather, who passed away. They would see shadows peeking around corners, and one day, my uncle looked towards the staircase and saw a shadow outlining what looked like a man with a hat. My grandfather always wore his hats, even if he was at home. One of the nights I slept in my cousin's room, I heard what sounded like a dog walking around the room. I brought it up in the morning, and apparently that's something that happened to my cousin as well. My uncle's other house was also pretty active with unexplained things. For example, his back door was banging so aggressively it broke the glass. Mind you, he has walls that are about 12 feet tall with barbed wire, and there was no one there. Continuing our conversation that evening, my uncle took me for a stroll around the neighborhood. He would point at different houses and then tell me what that particular neighbor's paranormal experiences were. Apparently, the land that they lived on was active with the paranormal. The sun had already set, and the only light source we had was the sporadic light posts, which was sufficient enough to see. As we were nearing back to his main house, something caught my attention. About 55 yards behind his house is another neighbor. They had 2 dogs that were barking from the rooftop. And yes, you heard that right. It's common in Guatemala to have dogs on their flat rooftops. Anyway, there was someone or something in front of their house next to the light post. Normally, it wouldn't be a big deal. Dogs barking at someone or noise, it's kind of in their nature. But there was something off. At first glance, I thought it was possibly an older lady, because it seemed like her back was rounded and she was wearing what looked almost like a cloak. It's uncommon to see an older woman by herself in the evenings, so I pointed it out to my uncle. He glanced over and instantly got goosebumps and told me, "That's not a person. That's a spirit." And with that, he went inside his house. Curious and still being a skeptic, I lingered outside studying this person or thing. Even though it was right next to the light post, I couldn't make out any details. It was just this bulky, black entity. Then, it started to move slightly to its left. And it was one swift motion, almost like it was gliding. Then it started to turn almost translucent. I rubbed my eyes thinking that maybe I had stared at it for too long, and it was causing irritation. I focused my gaze back at the thing, and it's still translucent. It started moving again in that slow gliding rhythm. Suddenly, this thing turned back into a solid black shape and took quick, long, abnormal strides towards the forest. And with that, I immediately went back inside the house and told my family what I had seen. I've always been more logical and analytic to anything considered paranormal. I guess it's an easier approach than accepting something that can't be explained. It's terrifying to me. But I just can't say exactly what this was because I've never seen anything like it. I've heard many stories about skinwalkers and kind of juggled with that idea. The weird thing is that I almost feel attached to whatever I saw. I don't want to sound crazy, but like, I can always feel it at a distance. It's strange to describe, but it feels like its energy still lingers around me. After that event, I've had many more strange encounters that probably deserve its own separate post. This is the first time I've posted my story anywhere. Finally, after more than a decade later, I'm open to getting input on what I saw that evening, to hopefully put my mind at ease. Hey guys, there's just a real quick note from the author before this. I wasn't going to read it because it is addressed to Let's Read, but it does kind of put a couple things, not really into perspective, but I feel that it is kind of part of the story, so it is important. Hey, Let's Read. I know that many of your subscribers consider your channel and others like them, who compile encounters of the paranormal and high weirdness, to be simply entertainment. But I also know that for a vast majority of those who have had such experience, they're anything but entertainment. I apologize to those who may consider it a spoiler to say up front, but this particular experience of mine ends on a victorious and hopeful note. I'm not saying that the danger wasn't real, or that the encounter wasn't terrifying at the time, because both are true. But over the years, I've heard hundreds and hundreds of accounts of those who were left in fear, left in confusion, or left in darkness. They had no answers and no clear resolution. It is for them that I announced the end in the beginning. I don't pretend for a second to have all the answers, but I know someone who does. Though I have kept this encounter quiet for many years, it's time to make it public. It's time for a few answers, and a bit of light in the darkness. All names have been changed, as I can't speak for anyone but myself. Okay, time for the story. In October of 1993, at the age of 22, I was attending college at UW-Stevens Point, Wisconsin, for a bit over a month. I had been friends with a young lady we'll call Jane. Though not dating, it did seem like we might be headed in that direction. And in any event, we spent a great deal of time together. She had often remarked about her fascination with the occult and supernatural. Though not a practitioner, nor an experiencer, aside from one brief UFO sighting in 1985, I had been open all my life to the existence of things outside of the box of commonly accepted reality. During one of our conversations, Jane remarked that if she had ever had the chance to use a Ouija board, she was definitely going to do it. She had also asked me to be with her if it happened. Perhaps in my younger years I might have been all on board with this, but I have learned enough to know very well that such things are bad news. But at the time, I didn't want to get into any deep discussion as to why. I also did not feel like getting into an argument if I said no and she pressed, so really believing it would never happen anyway, I told her I promised to be there. So it figures that 1 week later, not long before Halloween, she comes dashing into my dorm around 7 p.m., excitedly telling me that her and her roommate, Brenda, and our mutual friend Dave had borrowed a Ouija board from someone on her floor. And now, would I please be there, as I promised? Grinning internally, I apologized and said I couldn't make it, as I had an acting rehearsal assignment I was just leaving for. Now, this was completely true. Visibly hurt, she left, but I wasn't feeling bad about not having to honor my foolish promise. However, the instant I gathered up my bookwork and prepared to leave, I got a phone call. It was the classmate I was supposed to practice with. He had suddenly come down with a very bad cold and had to cancel. He said that he was sorry for the last-minute cancellation. The sickness just came out of nowhere. I told him that he had nothing to apologize for, and it wasn't his fault. I told him to get well, and then hung up the phone. Well, now I had no excuse not to go to Jane's room. I need to point out before I go any further that in the summer of 1991, after years of being a distant agnostic, I became a Christian. A full-on, Bible-thumpy, born-again, servant of Jesus Christ. A decision which, 30 years later, after tremendous torment and heartbreak, I have never regretted. I'm sorry if even saying so offends you, but I make no apologies. Anyway, back to my story. So, after hanging up the phone, I mulled it over briefly and called a friend of mine who was also a believer. Quickly explaining the situation, he suggested God may very well have had a reason for me to be there. And if I'm not actually participating, I should be okay. I was already thinking in that direction, and since my promise had been to just be there, not participate, hopefully God wouldn't think I was splitting hairs in that regard. I left my dorm and went up to Jane and Brenda's room on the 4th floor. As an aside, I also want to mention that they had lucked out and been assigned a corner dorm. Given how the dorms were laid out, all the corner rooms were roughly twice as large as normal, so there was plenty of space for the two of them and Dave. I opened the door, and it was pitch dark, except for the flashing light Dave was holding over the Ouija board. Jane and Brenda were currently using the planchette. They all acknowledged me as I entered, and I waved to them and went to lay down on the lower of the beds. The bed that was facing out into the room, cutting it roughly in half, while the upper bed was perpendicular to it and set up against the wall. So, I was laying on my stomach facing the wall opposite the entrance, and this allowed me to overlook the situation. I said nothing, did nothing, aside from preparing myself to be bored. The kinds of questions that Jane and Brenda were asking were the right kinds of no-sense questions perfectly suited to induce boredom. This actually made me feel a bit better, as it didn't look like anything potentially dangerous was happening. Just as I was thinking about leaving, however, something else beat me to it. The planchette suddenly moved to buy, and as that happened, I felt a strange pressure suddenly stop. I don't know why I didn't notice it when I first came in the room, but it was almost impossible to miss once it was gone. It was very similar to when you're outside on a hot, humid day and suddenly go into a well-air-conditioned building. All the heat and humidity is gone, and you're now able to relax. With the removal of this pressure, the last thing I could do was relax. My dog ears perked up, if you will. And I probably did look like that RCA dog as I cocked my head thinking, what the heck was that? I had no time to consider it, however, as Jane and Brenda immediately started the ritual to summon another spirit. It didn't take long. This encounter I remember much more clearly than the previous. The spirit said its name was Eni, and that it was a 19-year-old Greek fisherman who had died in the Mediterranean Sea in a boating accident back in 1917. With that, Jane and Brenda started asking it personal questions. But these were of a more important nature rather than the silly things from earlier. Brenda's grandmother was very ill. Was she going to die? Jane was very concerned about meeting the right man. What should she look for? Now, as I said earlier, I am a Christian, and I trust that what the Bible is just what it claims to be. The inert Word of God. Knowing that requires me to relay the truth that I know when required, and to do so as accurately as possible. With that in mind, the Bible says clearly that when we die, we are essentially asleep and know nothing. Aside from extremely rare exceptions, nobody is conscious after death. Again, I'm sorry if some find declarative statements like this to be offensive, but again, I make no apologies. Ghosts, as popular culture thinks of them, do not exist. Good angels, fallen angels, and the spirits of dead hybrids, meaning nearly every single creature considered a cryptid, condemned to wander Earth, comprise the overwhelming majority of spirits that interact with humans. With that thought in mind, I suddenly became angry. That anger quickly moved to outright fury. Whatever this being was, it certainly wasn't a dead teenage fisherman, and it was lying to these innocent young women. Without a doubt, it was a lie that could not be tolerated. Still, I make no outward sign of my internal fury, even if such a sign could be seen in that pitch-black room. Suddenly, the planchette responses became jumbled and confused. Mere gibberish, basically. And though afterwards she said she couldn't remember why she did it, Brenda asked, "Is there something in the room that's bothering you?" With no confusion, the planchette slowly and deliberately spells out my name. At that instant, I had one of those experiences that seemed to take quite some time, but must have only been a second or two. Let me try to bring it across. Now, I'm not afraid of human beings, though I fully acknowledge that there are those who are stronger, smarter, faster than I am. I have no trouble admitting there are those who could kill me in a flash with a pencil. But I'm not afraid of them. They still have to put their pants on one leg at a time. They still have to deal with bathroom essentials, like we all do. They are just like me, flawed and mortal. But this thing, whatever it was, terrified me. I guess the best visual representation with how my mind's eye perceived it would be the scene in the movie, The Fellowship of the Ring, after Frodo trips on the floor while at the end of the prancing pony and the ring falls on his finger. The Eye of Sauron was now able to see Frodo and looked down on him, overwhelming, consuming his entire vision. That's the closest I can get to what my mind saw. This creature was ancient and filled with malice. Malice layered up like an onion. Year after year, century after century, age after age, deathless in its hatred of humanity. This creature was ancient, full of power and hate, with intellect and power no human could hope to match. It was now aware of me, and it was looking directly at me. I was petrified. In all the myriad of accounts I have heard about other people encountering certain monsters and the physical dread that enveloped them, surpassing their ability to cope or even understand it, that's what I felt. I was a 22-year-old, normal human man, pitted up against the spirit of a hybrid super being, thousands of years old. I never stood a chance. But then, some other people who was inside me, but not me, came out into the open. It felt like being fully engulfed in a tidal wave, and all my ears could hear was a tremendous roar. The Holy Spirit of God was there, and making it no secret. I suddenly felt even smaller, like a little fly, about to get smashed between two enormous fly swatters. But I was no longer terrified. I was elated, exalted. It's hard to explain, but I felt a total joy, a complete and total joy. I remember thinking, Lord Jesus, if this is where I go out, I'm happy to have been a part of it. Your will be done. But then, though I heard no words, I had the unmistakable impression of someone putting their arm across my shoulders and turning me away. Along with that was the clear feeling of, not now, not yet, now is not the time. The next thing I know, I'm driving through the nighttime streets of Stephen Point, listening to a Men at Work album. I let myself do that for maybe 20 minutes, then returned to the school. When I got back, I found David, Jane, and Brenda downstairs in the student lounge discussing what had happened. They were glad to see me, and when I asked them what happened, I was told that once my name was spelled, I suddenly stood up and said, "I'm out of here," and left. Immediately after I left, however, Jane and Brenda became almost hysterical with fear because their hands were glued so tightly to the planchette that it was hurting them. Brenda cried out, asking what was wrong, and amidst the gibberish, the phrase, "want my girls," "supposed to be mine," "promised," came out of the planchette, moved with painful speed. Then it flew by, and their hands were free. With that, they all immediately fled to the lounge where they had stayed, not wanting to go back to their room. They all agreed that the spirit seemed to think that Jane and Brenda had been promised to the spirit, but it had been denied and was now furious about it. Furious perhaps, but powerless to do anything but whine. That was the last impression I had of it before I was moved away. Despite how terrifying the creature was, from my perspective, the gulf between it and our Creator was immeasurably greater than that between myself and it. It was completely powerless to do anything if God did not allow it. So, I'll leave my story there, on that critical note. This hasn't been some religious polemic, but a message of hope. Our Creator loves us more than we can imagine, and if we are willing to admit the darkness in ourselves and ask to be forgiven for it, Jesus Christ will not turn away anyone who asks. Once that is done, you need not fear any other power, whether physical or spiritual, not under, on, or above this earth. Hello, I'm a 21-year-old guy from Denmark, and back in 2017, I was going for a vacation road trip in the United States. We started off in Las Vegas, where my mom visited an old woman that she used to live with for a while, back when she was 16 as an exchange student. We then drove to LA, then Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and finally ended in Louisiana. I was, and still am, very into true scary stories. I especially enjoy cryptid and unexplained creatures, and skinwalkers/wendigos. Well, I told my family about it, but my sister and her boyfriend always teased me about believing in such things. My dad don't believe in God or superstitions or anything, but have had some strange experiences that have happened to him over the years, so he is a little bit more open-minded. As is my mom, who has also had some experience with some paranormal shit. When we were driving through the deserts in Arizona, my dad had to smoke and we wanted to stretch our legs. So we got out of the car and my dad started smoking and we looked around. Then, suddenly my sister says, "What is that?" and then points towards the desert, where we immediately noticed a lion-sized, totally black cat. Like, it was so big and so black that it absorbed the light, and it was just walking around. It had a really long and thick tail, and it walked so freaking weird, it was kind of like a robot, totally stiff legs. Then it noticed us, and just froze. It turned its head really fast, and just stared. Then it turned its body without moving its head, and started walking our direction. Then I said that we should probably get in the car, and get moving, because I wasn't staying around waiting for it to reach us. My family quickly agreed, and we hurried to get back in the car and took off. For the rest of the trip, my sister's boyfriend and my sister didn't tease me about unexplainable creatures anymore. We were really shaken up by this thing. I started Google searching about animals that live in Arizona, and I couldn't find anything about a big-ass feline that is black anywhere in the world. The only big cats I could find were jaguars, and it's rare that they get black, and not that black. And it was also much larger than a jaguar. And jaguars, cougars, and mountain lions live in forested areas. And definitely not in the middle of a friggin' desert. I still think about this thing a lot, and I've never found an answer as to what this was. And I believe even more now that there are creatures in this world that we don't know about. Anyway, thanks for listening. So to start this off, I know this may sound like a creepypasta, but like I've said before in some of my other stories, it's true, no matter how fictional it may sound, and it may be even longer than my first story. I have videos to go with it if anyone really wants proof, so here goes. As I mentioned before, I live on some property in Wilson, Oklahoma. Wilson and some of the surrounding towns are known to have a sort of hallowed ground existence to them. And we all know that you can't have good without bad. Now, I'm not sure if anyone here fully believes in the paranormal or that there are things out there that we haven't fully discovered or understand. But I do. And I have. Long before I moved to where I live now. I've had paranormal things happen to me my whole life, and it's not like when I moved here, everything just started going crazy. Don't get me wrong, when I moved here, I had heard the stories about Molly and Colt. I had heard of cryptids, skinwalkers, all that other stuff like that. But other than seeing shadows and the occasional flying deodorant can, it never really came across anything that scared me. That wasn't until about 2 years after I moved here. I had just left my shop on my property and was walking my dog over to the house. Now, I don't know what gave me this intuition, but I've always kind of had a sixth sense, so to speak. Not like I feel like I'm being watched, but more like something's just not right about this. I put my dog in the house because I don't want her getting hurt. She's a 107-pound yellow lab, so she's not in any real danger, but I do everything I can to keep her safe anyways. I shut the door and walk around to the side of my house. Now, there's an AC unit with a wall close to it on 2 of the sides. And something tells me to go check the corner I can't see. So without hesitation, I trot over to the AC unit, peek over to the corner, and used my phone flashlight to see if anything was there. And honestly, what I saw kind of perplexed me at the time, but now thinking about it, it just kind of gives me the chills. Illuminated under my light is an armadillo. But it's not normal. I swear to you, this armadillo had no tail. And not like it had been bitten off. Like, if it had not fully grown. I can't fully see its head and face, which, again, now looking back is kind of weird because the angle I was looking at I should have been able to. I'm looking directly over it. I'm looking over this armadillo for a second because it's just so weird. I see its eye, just one eye, looking at me. Like it knew that I knew something, but I just hadn't connected the dots yet. I walk inside, and no sooner than I shut the door, all the dots connected. No tail, weird shape, a weaker small animal, no face I can see, but I can look it in the eye. Skinwalker. Now, keep in mind, I'm from Texas and I live in Oklahoma. I grab my Glock 19 and a real flashlight from the cabinet they're in, and I run back to the corner. It's gone. Completely. Nowhere to be found. Keep in mind that this is a 5,000 lumen Bushnell hunting flashlight, specifically made for this. The thing disappeared. Craziest thing is, 2 days later, my dad sent me a picture while I'm at work of the most beat-up looking, rabid looking, tailless coyote. Now, from what I hear, skinwalkers are smart. Not immortal, so if you think you have a skinwalker problem, keep protection close. You may need it. I know this sounds more like a creepypasta than real life, but I swear it's all true. And I'm not too scared about it either. The only thing that scares me is when the forest breathes. Yeah, I have video proof of that too. I think I'll save that one for another day though. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are enjoying the videos. It seems like the true scary stories from the internet get more interactions, so if that's what you guys want to see, let me know and I'll try to do more of those. I've got a few creepypastas that are going to be coming out, and I'm going to start trying to upload twice a week. So I hope you guys do enjoy my videos. You know, if you are, give me a like down below. Make sure to hit that subscribe. And I hope you guys enjoy. Anyway, I will see y'all in the next one. Peace out.